If you want to use your camera professionally and have just started, this article is for you. What kind of lens you are going to use is the most important question here. Knowing your lens is the best starting point. You have yet to learn what 50 millimeters mean or what an f-stop is and all the numbers on the lenses. So here it is going to be super simple for you so that you can get the right lens for you. Now, first of all, we will try to know the lens and all the information on the lens. So some companies are going to show more information on their lenses and some are not. All lenses are not going to fit on every camera. So the very first thing to understand is not all lenses are going to fit on every single camera. For example, if you have a Canon camera, then there are specific Canon lenses that they make to fit onto the Canon cameras. A Sony lens is not going to fit onto that Canon camera and vice versa. Now, some other companies make lenses and these can fit on multiple cameras if you get the right version. For example, right here, we have a Sigma lens that is going to fit onto a Sony camera. We also have a Tamron lens that fits onto a Sony camera. Now, some adapters are going to let you put Sony lenses onto Canon cameras and vice versa. Correct lens mounting. Since this is a beginner's guide, when even looking for a lens is to make sure that it's going to work with the camera that you have, we need to make sure that it has the correct lens mount. Meaning if you get a Tamron lens, we want to make sure that this mount goes onto my Sony camera, not a Canon camera if I want this to go onto my Sony camera. Now, you can find out this stuff just by doing a quick Google search. Lens for the Canon 90D. So let's say you have a Canon 90D. We're going to ask what kind of mount is on the Canon 90D. I can see that it has the EFS right here. Now, I'm going to get more into the S part, and that's why you need to know what kind of sensor your camera has. You need to know if your camera has a crop sensor or a full frame sensor. Maybe it's a micro four thirds sensor. This might sound confusing, but again, just Google it and find out what kind of sensor type your camera has. So for example, with Canon, we have Canon EFS. We also have lenses that just say Canon EF. Now, what's the difference? To make this simple, Canon made a bunch of cameras with the same mount. But because there are different sensor types, you have their full-frame DSLRs. You also have their crop sensor DSLRs. They made two different types of lenses. They made lenses for the full-frame cameras that will also work on the APS-C or crop sensor cameras. But then they made lenses specifically for the crop sensor cameras. Even though they fit on, there is going to be vignetting. Lens for Sony camera. You can put on a Sony lens designed for the APS-C. The smaller camera, you can put that onto a full-frame Sony camera, but you will get vignetting. And right here where it says EFS, that is letting us know that it's made for this smaller sensor camera. Sony does something very similar with their cameras as well. We have their crop sensor mirrorless cameras. We also have their full-frame mirrorless cameras. So you can put these lenses on either the camera, the smaller sensor, or the larger sensor. Well, how do we know which lenses were made specifically for the full-frame cameras? Full-frame lenses. I don't recommend buying the full-frame lenses unless you know for sure that you're going to upgrade to a full-frame camera in the future. Now, thankfully, on Amazon, they've made it much easier for us to make sure we are getting the right lens for the right camera. Let's say I'm looking to get a Sigma 60mm f1.4 lens. I can double check and make sure that it works on my camera. So this specific lens is only going to work on Canon EFM cameras like the M50, the M6, or any of the Canon mirrorless cameras that are crop censored. Again, this is probably confusing, but you just need to know what mount your camera has to make sure that it works with your camera. Numbers on the lenses and what they mean. Let's talk about the numbers on these lenses and what they mean so that you can get the right lens for you. Let's start with the number that comes just before them. This stands for millimeters. This right here is a 30mm lens, and this is a Sigma lens that works on our Sony APS-C cameras. So what exactly does 30mm mean? This number simply tells us how zoomed in or zoomed out this lens is. You can also get wide-angle lenses, and the way you can tell is based on this number. Now, as this number goes higher and higher, you're zooming in more and more, and as this number gets lower, you're getting a lens that's going to give you a wider shot. Now, in this Canon lens, we have two numbers. We have a 10-18 millimeters, and this lets me know that this lens can zoom in and out from 10 millimeters to 18 millimeters. So 10 millimeters is going to be wider because this has two numbers. This is a zoom lens. Lenses which avoid blurry background. We're looking at that second number, the 1.4. That's the number that you want to look at on your lens. That's letting me know the lowest number f-stop that this lens can go to. Now, if you have anything from 1.2 to 2.8, you're typically going to get a blurry background in your shot. Now, if we take a look at this Canon zoom lens, we can see that we have that 1 colon. Again, let's just ignore that, the 4.5 to 5.6. Again, we are seeing two sets of numbers here, and that is our aperture. So the lowest f-stop that we can get is 4.5 using this lens. Zoom lens. However, what is the 5.6 on this lens? That is letting us know that when we zoom this lens into 18 millimeters, so when we have this zoomed out at 10 millimeters, we are going to be able to go to 4.5. We can't go any lower, we can't get a shallow depth of field with this lens, but when we zoom into 18 millimeters, it's now going to be 5.6. Now, this is common with zoom lenses, especially with kit lenses. That's why when you zoom in on your kit lens, the image gets a little bit darker because that f-stop doesn't go as low and doesn't let as much light into the lens. Now, if you do not want this exposure changing as you zoom into your shot, I understand, especially for videographers out there. You want to look for a lens that has a zoom lens but doesn't have two sets of apertures. For example, I have an 18 to 35 millimeter lens. So this is going to zoom in, but the f-stop consistently is at 1.8. So when I zoom in, it's still at 1.8. When I zoom out, it's at 1.8. These lenses are going to be more expensive, but are worth it, especially if you're a videographer or if you need this for your photography. Conclusion. For every professional camera user, and especially for beginners, an understanding of the lenses is the key to success. Each company has a different name, so make sure you Google the right name when you are looking for a lens that has stabilization. One must pay full attention to studying the lenses and must know about their functions.